Thanks for watching. My name is Stephen Aiello, and what we're going to do today is we are going to take you through the whiteboard session that I do with customers that really demonstrates how Ahead is helping our partners and customers achieve a more operationally efficient and a more effective security and compliance program within their organization. When we start thinking about security ahead, a lot of us are fans of what was known as the SANS Top 20, or now they're the Center for Internet Security Top 20. And if you look at that list, the first and second controls, the two most important thing that you can do in order to improve your security program is, number one, have an inventory of authorized and unauthorized hardware on your environment, in your environment or on your network. And two is an inventory of authorized and unauthorized software in your environment. So when you think about what that is, that's the hardware assets in your environment and the software that lives on top of them. What the CIS, the Center for Internet Security, is really talking about is a CMDB. And Ahead really has a rich history in the area of creating CMDBs and making them usable and functional for our customers. And for that particular platform and for that particular use case, we leverage the ServiceNow platform. And a lot of our customers are at this maturity level, or they're almost there, right? And a lot of times this comes about because of our automation and orchestration capabilities within Ahead. We are working with customers to build an on-premises cloud or a hybrid cloud, and automation and orchestration is certainly going to be a part of that. By leveraging the automation and orchestration capabilities that we have, we can populate the CMDB in order to get correct information that's rich in context, assign asset owners, and link together all of the assets so we can build out complete systems. This has been a part of Ahead's history for probably a half a decade now. It's a very mature, robust piece of our operations. Where we've sort of grown from our traditional sort of CMDB work, ITOM, things like that, is into the newer modules that ServiceNow has to offer. And that's the SecOps module and the GRC module. Now, specifically in the SecOps module, there's two sets of capabilities that you can do that's of interest to most of our customers. The first thing is incident response, right? So how are we going to respond to incidences as they come in to our environment? So incident response. And then the second thing that most people will use the SecOps module for is for vulnerability management. When we get a vulnerability in our environment, how do we handle it? What do we do with it? How do we route it to the appropriate person so that we can respond to that vulnerability? And if you're a fan of reading really exciting security reports like I am, you'll know from the Verizon Data Breach Incident Report or the Cisco Security Report that once an attacker's inside your environment, the attack generally takes place and they've exfiltrated your data inside 7 days. So within 1 week, if you haven't caught them, if you haven't routed the ticket to the right place and responded, you've most likely lost that battle. And so specifically, the SecOps module within the ServiceNow application allows us to address these. So that's one piece that we'll talk about. Now, even though security is critically important, most of the time what the executives care about is governance, risk, and compliance. Because what risk and compliance generally should do is give you a scorecard on how your security program is running. So when we think about GRC, we think about terms like HIPAA. Or we think about things like ISO 27001 or PCI. These are all compliance frameworks that our customers need to adhere to. And so what the GRC module does is it helps load in all of that data and tie together the security controls with the data that's required to report on the security posture of the organization. So let me give you an example. most of the time an auditor will come in and they'll say, Mr. Customer, I would like you to give me a user in your Active Directory environment, and then I would like you to show me a ticket where that specific user was granted access to X, Y, or Z resource. So that would be the combination of the security program and then the reporting capabilities that are needed for the GRC team. So that's an important relationship. And what we want to do is we want to understand the context of the asset. So because many of our customers are either developing this rich CMDB or already have a CMDB, we can understand if the asset is important to the organization from a risk and compliance perspective. So we're drawing a relationship here. Now, why is this important? This is, to my understanding, a completely true story. I have a friend of mine, close associate, that actually works for RSA. And if you remember several years ago, RSA had a pretty notorious security breach. And they understood how the attackers got into the environment. There was a phishing email. They were looking and trying to do some recruiting. So they received an Excel document. The HR individual opened up the Excel document, and it contained malware. Now, what the incident response team noticed right away is that although they knew where the attacker had come in, the attacker came in on a desktop in the HR department. The attackers were trying to get to two specific servers, right? And they couldn't figure out why were the attackers trying to get to these two specific servers. It wasn't part of the financial organization. It wasn't in product development. There was no new R&D that was going on there. So the incident responders went to every group and said, do these servers belong to you? Nope, they don't belong to us. Do these servers belong to you? Nope, they don't belong to us. And finally, they got to the math department. And the math department said, yes, these servers belong to us, and they're critically important, right? And now what we all know is that the attackers were trying to get to the two servers within the RSA organization that held all the seeds for every single two-factor token out in the wild. Now, the humorous story is that those two servers didn't have two-factor authentication on them. And that's why RSA had to replace all those key fobs. So a little bit of humor there, and they did change that going forward. But that is a real-life example of why understanding what the assets, what are these assets, who owns the assets, what's on the asset, right? And if your security team doesn't have that visibility and that context for what is going on and why is somebody attacking a certain asset, then you're blind, right? And if you can't respond to that, and if you don't have that context, you really only have a small portion of the picture. So when we think about this sort of thing, we think about how do we help customers deal with this problem from end to end. So we'll talk a little bit more about the SecOps and GRC modules specifically. When we're working with our customers, many times we see that they focus on tools, right? So, and those tools could be, any sort of thing. It could be a firewall by Cisco or Palo Alto or whoever it may be. It could be a piece of endpoint protection, right? Which could be Cisco AMP or Carbon Black or Palo Alto Traps. It could be ICE, for network access control from Cisco. It could be a network file monitoring solution. There's a whole host of technical point solutions. And many of these tools give great information, right? But information in a silo is just that. Data is just data. What's important from a security perspective is that we give data context. So tools are just tools, and data is great, but we have to give data context. So what we do is, at AHEAD, we've developed a very robust Splunk practice. And where we have lots of data producers, sort of on this side of the wall, we have Splunk as a data consumer and a data correlator, right? So whether it's your firewall logs, your anti-malware logs, your network logs, we send all of those logs into Splunk. And then we have expertise on helping you correlate that data so it's meaningful information. It's more than just raw streams of data coming at you. Now, how does this play back into our overarching large picture here? Well, with Splunk, it's great. You can have a piece of information and you can know that an event is going on. So let's say you have a junior SOC analyst or a tier 1 help desk person who says, we have an alert. We have an event. We don't know if it's truly an indicator of compromise, otherwise known as an IOC, but we know we have something interesting because we have events coming in from multiple data sources that have been correlated in Splunk. What do? So now you have a correlated event, but that doesn't actually help you solve the problem. What you need to do is the SOC analyst or the individual in the NOC actually needs to get that data to the right person. So like we were talking about before, in the SecOps module combined with the CMDB capabilities, you have an understanding of, if a SOC analyst gets an alert, let's say, for a host 10.10.11.1, well, who owns that server? What department does it belong to? Now, we can automatically take that alert, send it into the SecOps module in ServiceNow, and because we have this context through the CMDB and SecOps relationship, we know exactly who that ticket should go to. And let's say, for example, this is an internet-facing web server, right? So we've got a web server team down here, and that ticket will automatically be routed to the appropriate team with the context. So ServiceNow and the SecOps module specifically can go out to different data feeds as long as there's an integration and actually pull all of that data, put it in the ticket for the person who's looking at it, trying to resolve it, so they know exactly what happened, all of the available intelligence to know, can they clean the machine? Do they need to isolate the machine? Is this a directed attack that there's only been a couple of known cases? Or is this just a wide net, sort of botnet type situation? This gives the individuals that need to respond a huge advantage over those that don't have this type of rich contextual data. What you can also do, if your security team is mature enough, is many security teams or incident response teams will have what they call runbooks. So I like to use this example of a web server. If you see that your web server has been compromised and you know that there's a piece of malware on your web server potentially being served out to your customers, obviously that's not a good thing. But malware infections are actually pretty common. And it's sort of that 80-20, 90-10 rule. Security teams are inundated with these things that happen over and over and over. And quite frankly, it's just a lot of manual effort to go through and resolve those issues. So this is where the automation and orchestration capabilities that AHEAD has comes into play. With leveraging automation and orchestration, you have the capability within ServiceNow and the SecOps module to make API calls. So if you have a web server that's been compromised, and let's say it's behind some sort of load balancer, we'll draw a bit of a picture here. If you have a web server that's behind a load balancer, we'll say we have two web servers, and this is our load balancer here. You can leverage this automation orchestration. ServiceNow can go talk to this automation orchestration engine. That's my gear. That's my representation for the concept of automation and orchestration. And that can actually go make a call to the web server, or I'm sorry, to the load balancer, and say to the load balancer, I want you to take this system, which had this IP address, 10.10.11.1, and I want you to remove it from the load balance pool. Then again, using automation and orchestration, we can take that server, put it on some other VLAN, isolate it so that the network team can, or the security team can do a forensics analysis on it. And then we can, again, use ServiceNow to talk to that automation and orchestration engine and actually deploy a completely new, fresh, clean server that doesn't have that malware infection on it. Use something like Puppet or Chef to redeploy your application if you have a CI/CD pipeline that you want to tie into. So we're building this self-healing, self-securing data center. Now, you might ask, okay, that's great, but that server most likely will be re-compromised or reinfected again. And that's a true statement. But again, that's not where automation orchestration ends. So let's say you have a vulnerability scanner, right, that you want to leverage. So I've got my vulnerability scanner, big V and C here. And this could be Qualys, it could be Nexpose, it could be Nessus, it could be any of the major scanners that have some sort of open API. you could then kick off a job to talk to that vulnerability scanner and say, I want you to go scan my web farm, everything that's forward-facing on the internet. And the vulnerability scanner might go, yep, we've discovered a new vulnerability in the HTTP server or in your email server. And so what do we need to do? Can we go out, again, back to ServiceNow and populate a change record? We could either do this at a scheduled time, but now we're, again, sort of automating this whole life cycle. Or if it's a web application, can you call out to your web application firewall and close a port, adjust some settings, something like that? It gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility, and it's all built on those runbooks that your incident response team has built out or our incident responders can help you build out. So that is sort of how we're looking at it from the pure security side. And you say, that's great. Well, what about that lonely GRC box over there? Well, again, the reason that we have compliance is to make sure that we have checks and balances for security. For all of these actions that we're taking, those are wonderful actions. But if we haven't proven that we've taken those actions, then as far as the GRC team is concerned within your organization, those actions have not happened because you can't prove them to the organization and you can't prove them to your third-party auditors when they come in. So let's take, for example, ISO 27001. And in most every compliance framework will say you need to have some sort of patching process, right? So if we load up all the requirements for ISO 27001 in the GRC module, and there's a tool that you can use called the UCF that you can purchase to work with ServiceNow, but basically it's a library of all the controls that would be required for ISO, right? So you load in all of these controls for ISO, whether it's password changes, patch management, things of that nature. And then every time one of these tickets are opened with automation, orchestration, because of the SecOps engine, what happens is that ticket is created, right? This is my little ticket for an incident, and that ticket is correlated through the GRC engine to one of those controls. So now you have that information documented in that ticket, and you have an attestation that these controls are actually being carried out. So what happens when your auditor comes in and they say, okay, Mr. Customer, we need to make sure that you're checking all of the boxes to achieve your ISO 27001 compliance, it's as simple with some of the intellectual property that a head has built as running a report out of ServiceNow. And you say, yes, Mr. Auditor, we can give you every single attestation for all of these controls that ISO 27001 has said we need to do. And so compliance becomes not a Herculean effort, once a year or quarterly, depending on how frequently you get audited. Or if you have customers that need to audit you regularly, you could be doing audit reports all of the time. Instead of scrambling to find all of this data, it's in one consistent system. And you know that the data is good because we've leveraged automation and orchestration to eliminate human error. So we have all these controls here. We package up our nice report. We hand it over to the auditor, who is usually very frowny, right? And they sort of have a tendency to make your life difficult. But in this case, because we have documentation and we know where all this documentation is, the auditor is actually very happy. And you're very happy because you have to spend less time with your auditor. This is a holistic way to manage security and compliance within your environment. And the important thing is that you step back. Instead of thinking about a point product or a point solution that only deals with technology, or you have an isolated governance, risk, and compliance team that only thinks in terms of policy and they don't think in terms of automation and orchestration, we bring all of this together for you and make it a complete and holistic solution. And that's really where the power that a head has and how it helps our customers achieve something that otherwise wouldn't be achievable. And when you look at other players in the landscape, whether another security vendor, they don't have the breadth of experience with the automation and orchestration, the CMDB, configuration management, the expertise in Puppet and Chef, the expertise within the ServiceNow platform itself to tie all of this together to really give your enterprise a true operating model to manage security, governance, risk, and compliance. So this is the high-level overview of how, again, AHEAD is helping their customers in this space. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.